Thank you, Board.Dev, for the invitation. My name is Tara Huffman. I am the Chief Program and Strategy Officer at BoardSource, where we eat, sleep, drink boards, because we believe that boards are a necessary and critical lever for change. And boards are where we begin to fashion, shape, and then fuel our organizations to be levers for centering the dignity of all people, and doing that through the way that we position and operationalize our separate yet collective organizational strategies here in the nonprofit sector. So I'm excited to be a part of the Tech Congress and excited to engage in this conversation with y'all.
Definitely couldn't do anything on boards without BoardSource involved. Really, just so grateful to have your guidance and involvement here. Excellent. So just to give a quick, quick overview of why we're even talking about this. Why do we think that you should be talking about AI at the board level? So number one, folks sometimes think of tech as mainly a back office or an operational issue. That's really no longer the case, and it's particularly so for AI. Every decision you make about AI is really now a values and an ethics decision, whether you're thinking about your team or the communities you serve or the environment. The decisions you make about technology are really at the heart of the decisions you're making. Tech strategy is core strategy now. And so it's really important for all boards and all board members to be aware of this. You don't need to be a tech expert. In AI, I was laughing with someone yesterday, we're sort of all experts and all novices at the same time. You do not have to be an AI expert to bring some real important perspective to a conversation about AI. As a board member, you are thinking about the approach and the values of your organization, and so bringing those to tech conversations is really important. You don't have to know all the answers to things, but you should be able to ask the right questions. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is what are the right questions about AI at the board level? It's not necessarily about tools, but it is about implications, and it's about risk. All of the things, it's about vision, all of the things that boards talk about on a regular basis. And so your role as a board, right now a lot of boards aren't talking about AI yet. Your role as a board is to make sure that you are stepping into that leadership position, again, by asking the right questions, not necessarily by having the right, all of the answers. So these are some of the three things that we see as, really coherent with the standard duties of a board. Number one, make sure that you are helping to set, or at least comfortable with, the vision of AI strategy at your organization. What does AI mean? Even if you're not using it, which would be near impossible for folks, considering, Zoom has some AI components, for example. AI is in, almost every tool we use, whether we acknowledge it or not. But being really purposeful about setting a vision for AI at the organization can be step number one. Number two is risk. Risk management is something board members spend so much time on. So thinking about the particular risks associated with AI is a really worthwhile conversation. And then third, once you've set those principles or the vision for how AI is aligning with your mission, and once you've thought about risk, you'll want to make sure that you've got ways to keep staff accountable. Strategy and accountability live with the board. And so figuring out how that maps from, in the AI era is really, really a critical piece of board evolution right now. But let's back up a little bit before we talk about AI and talk about the purpose-driven board leadership model that BoardSource is leading us into right now.
Absolutely. And so before I even get to the next slide, where we sort of dive into the principles, just to put as Alethea was talking, I was thinking maybe this goes without saying, but I think we need to still say it. So AI is fast becoming ubiquitous, right? And we're at a point where it's not a question of whether you as an organization are going to engage in AI, it's a question of how. We're just reaching a point, a tipping point where it is everywhere. I promise you, your staff is using it. They're definitely using it in their personal life, and they may be using it in their professional life. Your funders are using it. If you engage with any kind of government or other kind of CRM or learning management platform, they're using it. And so if you're an organization and your board is, just beginning to have this conversation, it can feel a little overwhelming, as most technological advances can feel kind of overwhelming if you're not steeped in it every single day. And so what we would offer from BoardSource is that as you begin to have that conversation, you start from a place of purpose. And that's where we talk about purpose-driven board leadership. It is not a non sequitur. It is actually central to how your board starts to address and begin to put some parameters around and some language around your organization's relationship with AI, and how your organization is going to engage AI and not just be engaged by, but proactively engage AI to make sure that you are furthering your mission. So next slide. So when we talk about purpose-driven board leadership, we're talking about four principles of purpose-driven board leadership. And I'm going to go through them rather quickly. But we have a whole presentation on PDBL. And so if you're interested in doing a deeper dive, feel free to reach out to us. My contact information is included in the slide deck, and we'd be happy to come to your conference, your convening, talk to your board about this. But the four principles are: one, purpose before organization. This is a principle that basically says that um, when you're thinking about your organization, you think about the organization's purpose, right? Before you think about the organization itself. You're thinking about what are the decisions that the board needs to make to advance the organizational's purpose, as juxtaposed against decisions that are about just sustaining the organization. The way I like to say it is that you go from thinking that your organization is the subject to understanding that your organization is a strategy to get to the purpose for which your organization exists. Your organization doesn't exist to exist. Your organization exists to effect some sort of change. So now the organization is a strategy to get to that change. And so all of our decisions are based on us strongly positioning the organization to get to the change. That's purpose before organization. Respect for the ecosystem is a recognition that our organizations don't exist on islands or in vacuums, but we exist in collective community with other organizations. Under a traditional frame, right, you would consider organizations who sort of do work similar to yours as competitors. But under a purpose-driven board leadership frame, I understand that I sit in an ecosystem of organizations who are either doing the work that I am doing, or who are doing work that impacts the population that I'm looking to impact. And so when I am sitting in the boardroom and making governance decisions, I am making those decisions with an awareness that the decisions that we make can and will negatively or positively impact our ecosystem. So how do I not abandon my organization's mission, but how do I bring our ecosystem into the boardroom and make decisions that don't just advance our organization, but actually advance our ecosystem and the good that we as a collective are trying to advance? Equity mindset, the third principle, is that I view everything through an equity lens. And so I look internal to our organization, but also in terms of how we are advancing our mission. And we interrogate how the way we do the work and the work that we do is either dismantling systems of inequity or is inadvertently propping them up. And where I identify ways that the work that we do and the way we do the work is in fact reinforcing the inequities that we say we exist to dismantle, what are we willing to do about it? And then finally, authorized voice and power is a recognition that the work that we do as organization needs to be authorized by the people who are ultimately affected, and hopefully affected for the good by the work that we do. So we shift from asking, what do we think is best, with no awareness or with little awareness of exactly who we are leads us to answer that question. And we start asking, what does the community, What does our target population think is best? What are their needs? What are their desires? And is the work we're doing not only aligned with that, but have we actually invited them into our decision-making practices, to including putting them on the board so that they are co-equal partners with us in making the decisions that help to advance the mission of the organization. So that was very quick. Like I said, we have 30 and 2 hour and half day versions of this. But those are when you're beginning to have a conversation about AI and the board's role around engaging AI and tech governance, you start from a place of purpose, right? How is AI impacting our purpose? How is it impacting the way we can accomplish our purpose? Is it posing any risk? But also, what are the opportunities that we need to be positioned to take advantage of so that we can advance our purpose with respect for the ecosystem through an equity mindset and in partnership with the communities that are directly impacted by the work that we do. So that leads us to sort of your board composition, right? Sort of who sits on your board, because what we believe is that who board members are and the perspectives and expertise that they bring informs how the board prioritizes and makes decisions for the organizations, which also informs what the board understands its role to be. And so role understanding, the board's understanding of its role when it comes to AI adoption and policy is critical. Again, this is where we start, right? You don't jump to the decision. You start from the certain place so that you're asking the right questions. And then finally, I would offer that as you do that in what we call the 3 modes of governance. Next slide. The 3 modes of governance, and this is from a book called Governance is Leadership. It's part of the framework that's offered up there. But we basically say that the board's role is more expansive than just fiduciary. The board's role is more expansive than just fiduciary. Fiduciary absolutely is one of the roles or the modes in which boards need to be able to operate, right? That encompasses the board's oversight role. Are we doing what we say we would do? Do we have appropriate systems and controls in place? Are we in compliance? Are we considering risk and risk management? But that role has to live alongside the board's strategic role, right? That's the board's planning mode. What impact do we want to have in the next 5 years? How should we prepare for significant change, including the onset and advent of AI? And how does that impact what we are facing as an organization? And that lives alongside the board's generative mode, right? That's really looking at existential questions for the organization. Who are we? Right? What is most important to us? And what are the most important questions facing us as an organization? Effective boards are able to live in and move between each one of these modes of governance, and to do that every single time they come together and they convene as a board to make decisions on behalf of the organization that really help to empower or set the CEO and the staff up for success to execute on the mission of the organization. So that's what I would offer in terms of purpose. I may have gone through that a little more quickly than intended. I'm sort of watching the time. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to go through the brief and also respond to any questions. But with that, Alethea, I'll turn it back or invite you back in.
Thank you. And thanks so much for running through this. I mean, I think what's really valuable about the purpose-driven leadership framework is you can apply it to, really any major issue. Right now, everyone is talking about AI, but certainly there are geopolitical issues that are coming up. There are a variety of issues where boards are going to have to do some talking and think about where their purpose and the purpose of the organization intersects with what's happening out in the world. AI, thankfully, we've got some really concrete examples and can dive into those. So thank you. And we will have time, by the way, everyone, for questions at the end of the call. So if you've got questions, For Tara, you can drop them right in the chat now, and we'll get to them, or we can get to them at the end. Definitely want to have this be a little bit more active there. So Board.Dev, we do two things. We place mission-driven tech leaders on nonprofit boards so that those boards can be stronger and have the expertise they need to help drive tech strategy at an organization. But we really, help all board members anywhere up level on technology and make sure that they're feeling comfortable in this sort of minimum level of tech fluency. AI adoption is one of the topics that our board leaders and nonprofit CEOs are asking us most about. And so we partnered with the Nonprofit Tech Governance Congress, that advisory board, to write a brief about AI adoption and policy. What should boards be talking about when it comes to AI? And so this is a 3-month action plan. Everything we put out is really designed to be actionable and to take organizations forward. I think a lot of times we hear a lot of shoulds, but not a lot of hows. And so this is designed to be practical guidance that really gets you to the how. As we go forward, I'd love to hear from you all. If you had 3 months to get smarter and better on AI, what's something that you would put on the agenda? What do you think you would want to tackle? We're going to get into this plan for sure, but would love to hear what you all think would be most critical. So as we get going, please do drop that in the chat. So, one of the things I mentioned at the top of the call, that one of the best ways that boards can engage with certain issues is just by asking questions. They don't always have to be, experts. The board's role for AI really falls into these 4 areas right now, which are typical for boards: vision, strategy, oversight, and resources. So nest right within what a board is talking about anyways. But when it comes to AI, here's how it manifests. So what's the vision for AI and how it will transform your organization in the long term? That's one thing that I think is, most nonprofit leaders and potentially their board chair partners are having the most trouble getting their heads around right now. I hear it from funders said as, frankly, they'll say it's a lack of imagination, and I don't think it's that. I think it's just a lack of it's a struggle when you've spent your time with an organization trying to make its model really solid in a certain environment. And now that environment is completely different. So it's really
Yes.
thinking about disruption and change. Tara, you're nodding your head. You're seeing that too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I like the way you said it. It's not a lack of imagination. It's like
No.
organizations, giving organizations the benefit of the doubt, which is what we always want to do. Organizations are working their tails off, right, to advance their mission and to serve the
Mhm.
people that they exist to serve. And they really are thinking as deeply as they can about their business models, right, and their organizational models, and their service delivery models, if they're service delivery, right. And so they were just tracking along, doing the work, and all of a sudden somebody created this thing called AI and just like it's like they threw a bomb in
Right.
the middle. It's like, right. And so organizations are trying to figure it out, right? And unfortunately, it isn't intuitive immediately. And so it's almost like you have to take a step back and figure out, how do I keep this train moving? I can't stop the
Mhm.
train. And
Right.
in many respects, our train is under threat right now. So I can't stop the train. I got to defend the train, and I got to figure out this AI thing, which is happening to us, right? And how do we position it so that it's not something that's happening to us, but it's something that we are proactively engaging in a positive
Yeah.
way to advance our organization's mission.
Yeah, exactly. Proactively engaging, right? That whole opportunity versus risk and threat thing is something
Mhm.
that's, they're big conversations that we're having here. So a lot of organizations are thinking about, how does AI change the way I do sort of my back office stuff? Can I get more efficient? But thinking about, what it means to your whole worldview and your programs holistically is really important. And boards are critical to that. That's like what they do, is think about, long-term transformation and long-term vision. So it's critical that they be involved in this conversation. Thinking about strategy, what you're actually doing, use cases, how these tools might apply to the work that you're doing now or the work that you could do, given that long-term transformation vision is really important. Oversight, of course, critically important. Again, boards are where strategy lives, but also accountability. And there's so much accountability wrapped up in the use of AI. From the ethical considerations to the data, oftentimes organizations are moving towards really cool solutions, but they don't necessarily have the foundational data structures in order to make those things safe. Those are the types of questions that boards can ask. Have we fully thought through the implications, and what resources do we need? Or what are the risks that we're taking on? Again, boards don't have to answer those questions, but they do need to ask them to understand, has the organization, how are they thinking about this, and what's the approach? That can really be some amazing, Tara, you're nodding again. It's like amazing sort of sanity checkers there, right?
Absolutely. So these boards' four key roles fit nicely in that sort of three modes of governance that we talked about early, that fiduciary, that strategic, and that generative, right? Because so the board's role, is not to decide what AI tool or method the organization. That's an executive thing, right? That's an operational thing that we leave it to leadership, with the
Yeah.
support of staff to execute on. But that taking that oversight role, right? And, doing the risk management. And then also taking that strategic and that generative role. What does this mean for
Yes.
our organization and our organization's purpose? What does this mean for the ecosystem in which
Right.
we all sit and we operate? What does this mean in terms of our business model? Those are all questions that are squarely within the role and responsibility of the board. And so that is where organizations, if you're a board member and you're listening to this, that is where your organizations need you to engage. It is not something to simply be left to staff. It is
Yes.
something to partner with staff, particularly the CEO, on, because I love how you say it, Alethea. This is not um, a play. You don't have to know all the answers. It's about asking the right questions,
Exactly.
and being curious, and whatever fears or anxieties that boards have around this, whatever insecurities that boards have around it, put it in the form of a question and then put it out there
Mhm.
and engage it, because that's the approach that we take when it comes to purpose-driven board leadership, right? We're not sitting here and saying do this, do that, do this, do that. We're saying these are the set of questions that boards can ask, whether you're in a moment of stability or you're in a moment of crisis. These are the questions that the board
Right.
can engage to get over the hump of anxiety, to get over the hump of insecurity, to put it all out there and get in that strategic and that generative space. I say mix it up, put it all out there, mix
Yeah.
it up, and that is what foments you getting to the solve
hmm
for the thing. Yeah.
I love that. I think that should be our tagline for all of AI. Just like get in there and mix it up. This is, you mentioned sometimes folks think that they need to leave it to staff. There are some areas where, frankly, it is better to just step away. This is not one of them. You're
Hmm.
not doing anybody any favors by not talking about AI at the board level. That is not may short term make some things easier with execution, but long term that is not going to work. So well, let's move on. Let's talk about some of those key questions, because these are some of the things that we call out in our 3 month action plan. So here we're going to go through a few areas, in those four. We're going to go through a few questions in those four key areas: vision, strategy, oversight, and resources. And these are some of the questions that we suggest, folks think about. Number one, get really creative, mix it up about how AI might amplify your mission. And then think about what AI's impact in 3 to 5 years might be. None of us are really, well, I'm guessing no one on this call is a trained futurist, right? But that's sort of that should be like yeah, the second part of everybody's title at this point. Everyone's forced to be some sort of a futurist. So what do we think the impact will be on our organization, on our issue area, on the nonprofit sector, on AI in general? So that's one question. Key questions for strategy. How are we testing AI? Can you go next slide, please? Key questions for strategy. Miriam, can we go next slide, please? Thank you. Are we, testing AI where it helps our mission, not just where it trends? This is really important for boards to be aware of right now, that right now, there are some funders who still continue not to fund tech, but many are really excited about funding AI projects. And so therefore, many organizations are going in a direction of testing AI where it might not make sense, because frankly, that preserves a really key funder relationship. And that is a reasonable decision to make, given the world that we're in. But it's an important question to ask is, are we testing a shiny thing, or are we, really going where something might help our mission? So that can be an important question. Thinking about, of course, community and stakeholders. Something that seems operational, but actually is like very key to the approach and the ethics and values of the organization is whether to build or to pilot or to adopt existing tools. So that'll come to many organizations. Like, are we going to go with only trusted solutions that our peers are using, or are we going to try to build something completely new? Tons of implications, in terms of finance, in terms of, resourcing generally, but also frankly, in terms of, values, ethics, and the implications on the community if you're building new tools rather than, or, new models, new ways of using those tools rather than ones that are trusted. Again, an example of, something that, is really critical for boards. I'm going to go through the two last areas, and I'm going to ask everyone on the call to see, tell us if there's something in here that feels most relevant. So please feel free to drop these in here. Oversight is super important. So, are we following best practice as much as it exists? Are we following best practice for our own values and privacy? Have we set some guardrails? On the opposite side of that, you want to set guardrails, but you don't want to set bottlenecks. So do you think the staff feels safe to experiment in a way that's aligned with your principles? And when they do experiment, are they going to flag concerns? Are they going to raise the alarm if something doesn't seem to be going right? Super critical to build the right culture around AI. And that, as with everything cultural, really can start with the board. So, making sure that folks are engaging in a way that enables you to make good decisions at the leadership level, between executives and boards. And then thinking about resourcing. Where can AI reduce costs or time? That, of course, is, we get asked about AI for efficiency all the time. But again, there are like values and ethics considerations around using AI to reduce costs or time. Are you doing that to reduce staff numbers, or are you doing that to, increase time for program engagement, for example? That's a question that has come to many boards we know recently. Do you understand the full costs of proposed solutions? We just came out of Climate Week here in New York, and so there was a lot of discussion around the climate implications of AI, and that's starting to become a really common board level question as well. Okay, this making this AI choice is going to bring us so much value in staff efficiency or program effectiveness, but what implications does it have? What effects does it have on the environment? It's something many organizations are asking. And then finally, can you measure ROI? The costs, I didn't talk about this on the resources slide, but the costs of AI implementations vary widely. It's very difficult for any organization, nonprofit or otherwise, to really get a good handle on what an AI initiative is going to cost. It's just those things just really are wildly in flux depending on the tools you choose and how that program scales up. And so figuring out a good way to measure ROI is really important. Are we getting enough out of this to warrant the change? Again, the board may not be able to answer that question, but nor will the staff in many cases. But being able to get a good idea of how you would measure ROI can be helpful in making decisions or in just structuring the way that you're, moving forward with an initiative.
Our CEO, Monica Karavarma, CEO of President and CEO of BoardSource, she sort of declared 2024 sort of a year of playful experimentation, right? We're going through a
Mhm.
transformation, and so it was like just a signal, right, from leadership that let's try some things, right? We don't have to be perfect. Not everything we try is
Right.
going to work. For those who, playful might be a little too playful, use whatever other adjective you want to put in front of it, but absolutely to make room to experiment with things, to try things out, to get curious with things. I think that this is definitely, again, and this is a place where the board can demonstrate leadership, right? If the board can model this for the rest of the organization, by making room for these conversations, these questions, these deliberations, these debates, right? The
Yeah.
boardroom can be the place where that can happen and model that for the organization. So it's not just happening at the staff level, it's actually happening at the board too, and that is how the board can partner effectively with the CEO. And again, as you were going through all of these questions, I was just again with applying purpose-driven board leadership, right? I see all kinds of questions around equity in here,
Mhm.
right? So approaching these questions through an equity lens. If we take any action, how does it impact? First of all, let's start with our own staff. What are the impacts for staff, and are there any equity implications for that? What are the impacts for our population or the community that we exist to serve? What are the equity considerations? Looking throughout our ecosystem, right? As we begin to take on things and engage with things or choose intentionally not to engage with things, how does that impact how we are able to partner with others in our ecosystem? Does that better position us? Do we end up taking a hit? Right, because we want to keep those partnerships, before us as we're making these decisions. And so, yeah, these questions, this approach of just asking questions, and I'm sure those of you who are on the call, you can probably, as we're going through each of them, you could probably generate 3 or 4 more questions, right? That could easily fit under
Mhm.
each of these section headings, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks to everyone for chiming in on what question resonates. Looks like we've got ROI for the win, but
Mhm.
certainly some other things that are feeling important here. And again, if you we haven't said it enough, just start by asking the questions. That's going to take you somewhere. And frankly, probably a really interesting conversation, as Tara was describing, around your values. This is like um, a new learning lab for folks around their mission and how it shows up in the way we behave in the world. So that can be really clarifying for many boards. All right, so moving on, where boards can have the most impact. Certainly asking those questions is really important. But then, we want to talk about where boards should be diving in. Miriam, next slide, please. Boards add most value, across the board by helping to set principles, by asking about risks and ROI, and by adding capacity. And that is true here as well. So, starting the conversation with those questions, talking about use cases, thinking about mission and value alignment, building guardrails, not bottlenecks. That's worth double clicking on too. You do not want to hold an organization back, but you want to make sure that they are moving forward in a way that feels like it's most on track for you. helping an organization to plan for the cost of adoption. Like, what is 2 years down the road? If we commit to a product or we commit to a way of running our programs, what is that going to mean as we scale up? A business leader, whether you're a tech focused or not, can really help build out that sort of model. And then focusing on, thinking about adoption, not invention, again, gets back to the question of whether you need to be building new things or just, going with what some proven tools that are already out there. All right, so moving on to the next slide, where boards add value. We just got a couple more slides and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. Just to call out, what is more of an ideal board role to where we know boards probably shouldn't step to that weeds point. Boards can really add value with those principles, thinking about ROI, adding tech capacity, whether it's like asking those good questions or figuring out where the team needs additional resources, and then helping to make calls about where it's appropriate to kind of push the envelope and try something new, and where you should be more risk focused. So not wanting to innovate. Those 4 areas are great places for boards to dive in. Places, we advise boards to stay out of would be in talking about specific tools. Again, as with any tech decision, you probably don't want to be involved in like vendor selection or implementation, although there might be questions, related to resourcing that you would discuss. Certainly not, project managing implementation. You want to hold the team accountable. That is part of your role, but not you don't want to be getting into the details of a project plan. And then thinking about, pushing organizations to replace staff roles with AI tools. I don't know many boards that have been doing this, but I do know a few. AI has grown in importance, and there are more possibilities for AI precisely when funding is becoming really, really difficult in the nonprofit sector. So that temptation is going to be there, but ideally, replacing staff roles is not the flag you're rallying behind. It might happen, but that's, probably should not be your call to action. Really helpful to see everything here in the chat. So thank you. Okay, we're going to do a quick summary of the 3-month action plan. I will say on the next page, on the next slide, we've got a series of resources. We'll send out this deck afterwards so everyone will have access to those. But there's resources from Board.Dev, from BoardSource, and from a couple other great organizations. Folks are starting to put out tools and frameworks and how-to guides all over the place. So we've recommended some of our favorites. But here's a very high-level summary of the 3-month action plan that you can find. It's a detailed, 4-page doc on our site that really is a playbook for boards to get into this. You don't have to do every step, but these are, ways that you could move through a pretty fast-moving action plan to get you up to speed. You're not going to have this level of activity on AI for, the next 2 years. Ideally, this is just designed to fast forward you. So in month 1, definitely get it on the agenda. Get an idea of how the organization is using AI already, and also how the board is thinking about AI. So month 1 is really all about current state and starting the conversation. Getting a quick report from staff. Try to make it so they feel comfortable giving that information. Sometimes folks don't feel comfortable sharing where they're using AI. Just getting a good picture is like a great win for month 1. And then for month 2, you'll want to, start figuring out what the next phase would look like. So if month 1 is about now, month 2 is what should next be. So what are our principles as we approach AI decisions? Those can be pretty basic. We don't want anything that will conflict with our mission, and maybe go into that in more detail. And so the board can be, is obviously essential to that conversation. Moving, again, keeping staff involved, moving from how are you using AI now to, okay, what do you think are the risks and opportunities for using AI in the future, can give you a really good picture of potential use cases at your organization. And then learning, making sure that you're supporting folks in learning what they need to do. Again, we're all in a learning posture when it comes to AI, no matter how long we've been working with it. And it's great to create that culture of learning, again, from the board on down. If team members know that the board is supporting their learning, then they will be much more likely to engage. And then in month three, think about bringing someone onto your board who does know this in detail. Again, they're not there to answer all the questions, but they can help guide your decisions, or your conversations in different ways. So if you don't already have AI expertise on your board competency matrix, you might want to put it on there, or at least someone who's really, in the tech world. As you think about learning, you can continue to learn and run maybe a board staff AI sprint. If the staff sees that the board is also learning, again, it's like a great culture moment for everyone to say, this is where we are, as Tara said, mixing it up. And then as you start to implement pilots, or start to review how you're already putting AI into use, think about, taking those principles and turning them into a checklist that you can use. Okay, we know how we want to be using AI. Is this how we're actually using this? We've got this laid out in more detail, as I said, in the playbook that we have, but it really is about month one, figuring out what now is, month two, figuring out what next should be, and then month three, trying to get to that next. You can space this out too. Several leaders have said, I couldn't possibly do this in 3 months. But there's also a virtue to doing it to doing it in this way. You can really build on the board's excitement and the staff's excitement and current needs to make a lot of progress. Tara, anything in here that you would add to? Anything maybe you've done at BoardSource?
So we too, so I saw some activity in the chat around an advisory
Mhm.
council. We have internal to our organization, we have a data governance committee that is comprised of staff, and we also have been fortunate enough to bring some tech governance leadership onto the board. And so we are we're experimenting, right, with how this works. We're running our own sprints, right? We're in the process of making some transitions based on the recommendations of the Data Governance Committee. And then I see Hardik's question about sort of like when you do have a tech savvy board member, what is their appropriate role? Can you call on them to take the lead on tools and implementation, right? That's sort of like you don't want the board choosing the actual tool, but if staff doesn't have the capacity to experiment and learn, is this a place where you can lean on your tech savvy board member? And I would say, this is a place where a board member can offer up their expertise if they have capacity to look into some things. That is a great place to engage them. But ultimately, right, it's up to the staff to sort of make the decisions about what makes the most sense for the way that we work and for the way to optimize our workflows so that we do not end up so that we are adding to and advancing, right, the organization's mission and doing it in a way that makes sense for the way that we show up
Yeah,
for work. And so and so it's not a it's not a one size fits all, right?
agreed.
It's not a
Yeah.
one size fits all. It's very contextual. And it depends on what current capacities are and how do you optimize the capacities that you have while you're building.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing those details about how BoardSource is approaching this. I do think this is an area where we all need to learn from each other. What steps are we taking and how's it worked out? So you answered one of the questions that was in the Q&A, which is great. Let's move to that. Just know that there's a slide here with a list of resources from BoardSource, from Board.Dev, and then from a few other organizations that are kind of friends and family doing great work in this area. Fast Forward has an AI policy generator. N10 has some great resources on AI. And TAG, which is the Technology Association of Grant Makers, has also put out a responsible AI framework. Can just be great background reading as you get into this.